Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by Frances O'Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC, the first woman in that role, and she was a very prominent figure in the abortive campaign to keep us in the European Union. Frances, lovely to have you with me. You've obviously focused a lot of your campaigning on raising up the incomes of those on lower pay. Philip Hammond decided to invest what available resources he thought he had in infrastructure, roads, research, in order to boost the growth of the economy. Governments can't help poor people without growth, can they? So he made the right choices, didn't he?
Well, I'd agree that growth is the way to tackle the deficit and also to start creating some better paid, higher skilled jobs, hopefully with steady contracts as well. But the problem, I think, with this autumn statement was we'd been promised by the Prime Minister that the government's going to be on the side of working people. And what we end up with is very, very modest investments in Britain's future, which is necessary, but it was at far too low a level. We've been left with a very modest increase in the minimum wage, which is still nearly £1 less than the real living wage of £8.45 an hour. And then, of course, the government has kept this public sector pay cap, which means that nurses, firefighters, home helps are going to get a real cut in pay next year.
But with debt careering towards £2 trillion, that's a terrible burden for the next generation. Our children, they've got to get that down, haven't they?
Well, they've certainly got to start creating decent jobs for young people. And of course, under 25-year-olds have been excluded from that increase in the higher minimum wage, let alone what's happening in terms of rent and housing costs. So that needs to be a priority for government. But I think one of the ways is by giving working people a stronger voice at work and maybe doing something a bit tougher in terms of top pay too.
Now, you were a passionate campaigner to keep us in the EU. What do you think of Tony Blair's idea that the option of a second referendum should be kept open?
I'm here as representing working people and we're very clear that whichever way people voted, our top priority is making sure that they don't pay the price of Brexit.
How did trade unionists vote in general? Do you know?
Our campaign shifted people and 6 in 10 trade unionists voted to remain. But it wasn't an easy decision for anybody, to be frank, because a lot of people felt that they hadn't had a promise of stronger rights for working people from Westminster or Brussels, and people's living standards have been stagnating for a decade or more, as we know all too well. But
as we get to know more detail, if you felt that working people were being let down by the nature of Brexit, surely at that point you would have to agree with Tony Blair that there has to be a second vote.
Well, my argument is that people's jobs and rights need to be at the heart of the negotiating strategy for Brexit, and that it can't just all be about the Conservative Party. The nation should be at that negotiating table, but so should unions and business too, because we need a Brexit that works for working people. Now, I don't detect any big appetite in the country for a rerun. Clearly, if there were major changes in opinion, then everybody would have to think again.
You're obviously not somebody who feels that it's a terrible idea to have a rerun. But can I just ask you, on the Green Paper that's coming out next week, which will say workers should be involved in setting bosses' pay, represented on remuneration committees, bosses' pay should be published as a multiple of average workers' pay. These are things you'd welcome.
We'd certainly welcome it, but we believe that workers should be on the board, exactly as the Prime Minister promised, that we know that we can get better decisions if workers are there, as we see in other European countries. But critically, it has to be...
This is more than Labour ever delivered, though, isn't it? And you wanted this
well,
stuff.
Labour's not in government, but it has to be workers chosen by workers. You can't, as some in the business lobby want, stick a flat cap on a director sat in the boardroom on his average of £5.5 million and call
So
him
you'll be looking at the
representative.
detail of how
very closely.
Right.
And it's very important that the Prime Minister sticks to her promise on worker representation on boards. If she doesn't stick to this one, then people will question whether her promises to workers on other issues will also be stuck to.
Frances O'Grady, many thanks for joining us.